website. So I'll start the recordings. And look, just before we kick off, I'm going to paste a link into the chat pod for all of you that I'd like you to click on, and that will open the professional learning attendee form, which basically just looks for your email and your name, etc. If you want to fill this out at some other point, at the end of the session or whatever, you can, but we usually just ask that people open it up so that they don't forget. Essentially, that will give us accurate details on where people are coming from, which schools, etc., are attending PD. So I'll provide that link again later on as we get towards the end of the session, but that's why we dropped that form in there. All right, so let's get back to the slides. The first thing I'm going to do before we start looking at the contents for today is I will share the slides that I'm looking at. So you've got your own copy. And I'm going to be showing you today how we do that. For your reference, in the chat pod, you will be able to download a copy of the slide deck that we're looking at today for Zoom Basics. And look, what we're going to be looking at today are what I would consider the core functions of Zoom that people need to use with this tool. Next week, we get into the more advanced uses of Zoom, and then we also have a session on specifically learning and teaching applications of the tool. But today we're going to be looking at the difference between the Zoom application window, which is also called the desktop application, and the Zoom dashboard, also the CSU Zoom Portal, which is otherwise called the back end. So we've got the desktop application and the Zoom Portal. It's important that you know the difference. We'll look at recording, screen sharing, specifically the Blackboard or the i2 Zoom item, how that works. And then we'll see how we go time permitting. There's always a heap to cover in these sessions, and we also get a bunch of questions from people as we go through, which we absolutely encourage. So look, Jed's here in the background looking at the chat pod and monitoring questions from you guys. If you can answer them in the chat, he will. If we need to pull me up to ask different things, that's absolutely fine as well. And I will stop periodically throughout the session as well to see if everyone's okay or if you've fallen by the wayside. So look, let's get into things. The very first thing I want to look at is this thing called the Zoom application window. It's also called the desktop client, and you might hear people refer to it as that other box. And the reason that we're going to look at the application window is it'll allow you to change your profile details, including a profile picture if you wanted to do that. It's really important because you need to know how to update Zoom. And this is a program that will release a new update at least once a month, if not more. And sometimes it doesn't really matter. The features or the updates aren't particularly critical. And other times they are absolutely essential that you have a more up-to-date version. And in extreme cases, not having an up-to-date version of Zoom will actually stop you using the program. So worst case example I can think of at the start of COVID, we had a bunch of students using Zoom in invigilated exams. They were on Macs, mind you, but they hadn't updated Zoom and they couldn't join their online exams. So that's just an example of how things can go pear-shaped if the platform is not kept relatively up to date. It also gives you quick access to settings around your webcam, your microphones, etc. And we'll provide you with a summary of meetings that you've got against your name. So let's have a look at it. It's called the desktop client because it's on your desktop. So I'm going to minimize all these windows, get rid of that horrible Skype message. Let me just get that off my screen. Skype that does not work. Let's just get you out of the picture. Okay, so look, forgive my messy desktop over here, but the thing I want to draw your attention to is this little icon, this Zoom icon, which sits on my desktop. If I double click on this at any point in time, it will open up this window. All right, the Zoom desktop application, and we'll have a look at how that works. Can I just confirm from everybody, in the chat pod, for example, or using a reaction perhaps, that you can see the box that I'm talking about on my screen. Fantastic. I can see Jed nodding his head as well. So this is the desktop application. The things I'm going to draw your attention to, you'll know that you're looking at the right thing because there are 4 buttons over here on the left. We don't really use a lot of the other features that are available in this tool. The one thing that I do want to draw your attention to is in the top right-hand corner. If you can see, there's a tiny little profile image there of my head, or rather the image that I have as my head. If you left click on this once, it will bring up a menu. And 2/3 of the way down, we've got an option that says check for updates. So this is how we make sure that Zoom is up to date through the desktop application by clicking on your profile image in the top right-hand corner and selecting check for updates. Now, in my case, I'm up to date and it says I'm on version 5.8.3. You may find when you go to do this, and some of you might be doing it now, that it tells you that you're not up to date. There's an update available and it will download that for you and install it. It will not install it while you're in a live Zoom meeting, but as soon as you get out of this meeting, then it will update it on the spot for you. So that's quite quick. Some other options in that area. You can access your settings. You can also access your profile. And if we have a look at profile, for example, it's going to open inside a web browser what's called the Zoom Portal, the Charles Sturt University Zoom Portal for its full name. Its nickname is the back end. So we had the desktop application, which was this box accessed from your desktop, and then the back end, which is called the Charles Sturt University Zoom Portal. And this is where we one way that we can access all of our Zoom settings, not just a summary, but all of them. Inside your profile, if you wanted to change parts of that, you're going to find things like your image. If you wanted to change your profile picture, you can upload your own. You're absolutely free to do that. And you can also change some of your other peripheral information, titles, things like that. All right, so we will have a look more at the Zoom portal and its other deeper settings later on. But the main thing I wanted to show you firstly was the desktop application. You'll also notice that there is a cog underneath your profile image. If you left click on that, it will open up a settings area, and this will give you access to some of the settings that you use in Zoom, probably the more important ones like your video and audio settings, where you can check your webcam, for example. You can also click this amazing button called Touch Up My Appearance, which can make you look far more attractive than you are in real life. You can tick that, ramp that right up. You're also able to change the webcams that you're using, for example. I'm not going to go through all these settings, but I would suggest you absolutely click on them and have a look. Yeah, thanks, Jed. You can also have a look at your speaker settings, your headset settings. If you're having trouble in your Zoom rooms or your students are telling you that they're having trouble hearing you, you've got 2 ways of looking at those settings. One of them is opening your desktop application and going into video or audio to fix them. The other one, if you look down the bottom of your Zoom interface, and I will drag the screen over here for us to have a look at. Here's my Zoom room. And then right down the bottom here, you can see your Zoom interface bar. You can fix those settings, audio and video settings down the bottom next to the microphone that's green and moving. So I know it's picking up sound from somewhere. You can also hit those chevrons and adjust microphones and speaker settings, etc. from in here. So in Zoom, there's usually at least 2 ways to do things. All right, so one of them is using the settings from the desktop application, and the other way is to change them in the live meeting room itself. I will draw your attention to a couple of more areas within the desktop application. Under the general settings, go through these and I guess choose them to your preference, but one that I would absolutely recommend is if you go down to where it says share screen, and under the share screen option, about 3 down, you should see one of the choices talking about show my Zoom windows to other participants. It's an important option. I have it ticked because it means that when I click things in Zoom, you can see them, my settings windows, the chat boxes, everything within the room. The participants in the meeting can also see them. If you don't have this box ticked, they're not going to be able to see your Zoom settings related interface. I don't know if that's making much sense, but you won't be able to show them settings box, for example, the Zoom desktop application. They won't be able to see that. And I usually have it ticked because I don't have a problem with them seeing what I'm doing in Zoom exactly. So have a look at that one. And the other one that I would be looking at for most people first time is to think about your background in Zoom. You can click on background and filters. For me, I don't have a background on at the moment, but a lot of people do use them. We look more at virtual backgrounds and filters, etc., in the advanced Zoom session, but this is where you access that information from the desktop application, turning on the settings and going to background and filters, etc. All right, so there are a number of different areas in here within the settings that you can access either from the front end, the desktop application, or the back end, which is the CSU Zoom Portal, and we will have a look at that shortly. Jed, I know I'm speaking at 100 miles an hour, so I'll stop there for a second. Have we got any questions, anything?
No, we're all good. I thought it was just a good point you raised, Lachlan, about those settings, because I think that's often something that students throw academics a question in a meeting. It's like, let me show you, and if you can't show them that setting aspect, that's pretty important. So yeah, good spot.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's easy to miss. All right, so I'll minimize this. You can always find the desktop application again if you're looking for it, if you're sure that you've already opened it but you can't see it, by hovering your mouse over the top of the Zoom icon in your taskbar down the bottom. And you can see there I've got two windows. One of them is the live meeting and I can see all the cameras, etc. And the other one is the desktop application. So if you're not sure where it is, maybe it's hidden underneath all the windows that you've opened, just hover your mouse over the top of the Zoom icon in your taskbar and you'll be able to select it from there. Okay, moving right along. Let's have a look at the Zoom interface. All right, now we will race through this because I'm sure a lot of it is familiar to people in the meeting, but it's important that I show it to all of you. So what I have here is our Zoom meeting window. Yours is probably looking fairly similar to mine. I have on what's called the gallery view, which means that everyone's video, cameras, etc., is of equal size. You change your views by going up to the top right-hand corner in your interface and clicking on the view button, and you can switch between what's called speaker view, which will highlight the main person doing the talking in the meeting, and gallery view, which, as I said, has everyone's either profile image if they don't have a video on, or their video the same size. Okay, now I can see we've got a question coming in here. How do you select a virtual screen picture behind the live image? Yeah, so that setting inside the desktop application is where you find your virtual background settings, David. So if you open up the desktop application and go to settings, underneath background and filters, you'll find virtual backgrounds. They will not work for you necessarily if you don't have a single color behind you. So if you look at my office, for example, I've got lots of different colors going on. So I can't use a virtual background unless I look at something like using a green screen. But a lot of people either in work offices or home offices, etc., just have a relatively single color behind them, a white wall, or whatever. At that point, you can use the virtual backgrounds without having a green screen, right? So you can turn them on from here. A lot of people do that. I'll talk more about green screens in the advanced session for sure, for those interested in how they work. But yeah, for a lot of people, just having a white wall or even just a single color wall behind them will do the job. All right, so let's keep looking through the interface. We looked at our views. Down the bottom, we have the Zoom taskbar. And as what you'll see depends on whether or not you're a host in the meeting. So the person that creates the meetings is always the host by default with all the controls. And the rest of the people by default will be guests. The shades of gray in that explanation are we also have co-hosts, or another word for them is alternative host. And we can set people as alternative hosts when we create Zoom meetings, or we can also make people co-hosts in our meetings, and that's done through the participant panel. And I will show you how to do that in just 1 second. All right, so let's look at this taskbar down the bottom for me. I've got my microphone bottom left-hand corner. The green is going up and down, telling me, just giving me a bit of feedback that it's working. You can hit the chevron and move through your settings. Video settings are the same, except it relates to webcam. You can turn that off and on from there. Whether or not your video and your participant videos are on by default is part of the setup for your meetings. I'll show you how to do that before we finish today. There is a sorry, Jed.
Sorry, Lachlan, to say too, when you just hit that video option there, just back to David's earlier question, you can also set that video background from there as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So the chevron that's next to the video start and stop button will also let you access your video settings, your virtual background, for example, from there. So you can do it in a live meeting, or you can do it just from the desktop application if you're not in a live meeting as well. Yep, good pickup. All right, I mentioned the participant panel before. It's down here on the left-hand side of the taskbar. I've got it so that when I click it, it appears up here on the right-hand side in my chat alongside my video meeting. When you click on it, you might see it popped out, for example. And if it appears like that, you need to be looking with Zoom boxes either in the top left-hand corner for a drop-down to control its settings, or in the bottom right-hand corner for 3 dots. Sorry, top right-hand corner. So I'm going to show you the difference between them. So here's my participant panel. If I hit the chevron in the top left-hand corner, it will give me the option to either close it all together, to minimize it, or to pop it out. If I click on pop out, I've got my participant panel there floating around, and I can left click and drag that where I need it. Some people will do this deliberately, so they have it on another screen so that they can have a look at who's in the list, etc. And other people like myself, I guess, like to have it merged so that it's all part of the one screen. Maybe you don't have multiple screens and you need it to be merged. And the way that you merge one of your panels like this, if it's not already part of the interface, is to look down in the bottom right-hand corner. As I mentioned, there are 3 dots. And I have the option at the bottom. You'll see here that there are requests for everyone to unmute their microphones. I can also mute everyone's microphones. The option to allow people to unmute themselves or not is also in here for hosts. There's an option here to have a bell on to show when someone joins or leaves. I can tell you that gets really old really quickly if you're contemplating having that sound setting on, particularly if you have a lot of people coming and going. Waiting rooms at Charles Sturt are turned on by default as a security measure. What that means is that people joining the meeting, if they haven't logged into their Charles Sturt University Zoom account, will be kept in the waiting room until you let them in as the host. The way that people avoid that is by actually logging into Zoom, into the Zoom portal, for example, or logging into their subject site, and that will pass them straight into the meeting. It verifies that they're authenticated. The next option down the list says lock meeting, and that will prevent anyone else from coming in. So if you're in a meeting and you want to make sure that you're not going to be disturbed, you can click on lock meeting, and that will stop anyone else from joining. Clear all feedback relates not to the chat pod, but it relates to people putting reactions into the participant panel. So you can see here before, when I was looking for feedback on if people could hear me or see me, someone's hit tick, for example, to indicate that yes, they could. Jed's just given me the thumbs up. Some of the reactions, or all of the reactions, are being collected down here for me to look at in the participant panel. So if you want to click on some of your reactions or feedback, etc., feel free to do so now. You'll see them all appear down here. Thanks, Adrian. I can see Leanne's having a party, etc. It's all being collected down here. And if you want to get rid of it all, you can hit clear all feedback and it'll disappear. Okay, so they will disappear over time, but otherwise you can hit clear all feedback and it will get rid of it. Okay. Now, Lisa's put a point in there. If you pop out the participant panel, you can move it to another one. Yep, absolutely. And there are some shortcuts there as well to be able to, if you wanted to get a copy of who's in the meeting. There are reports that will also give us a list of our attendees, but we'll get to that probably in the advanced session, I say. The thing I did want to show you, which I got completely distracted by, was how to merge this back above the chat so that it's not sitting inside your interface. It is the last option by clicking on 3 dots down the bottom, merge to the meeting window. And now it's sitting above my chat. There is a separator between the two. If you hover your mouse over it, you'll get the 2 arrows and you can make it bigger or smaller depending on which panel you would like to take up more space. All right, so I usually have them sort of halfway in the middle, but it depends how many people you've got in the meeting. The same thing applies to the chat panel. Now, if you can't see it, then you look for it in your taskbar down the bottom. There it is, chat. Once it appears, it'll either be merged like this or, see, I've minimized it now, it's disappeared. But I can hit the chevron down the bottom, or I can look for chat down here, and that will also bring it back. So there are usually at least 2 ways to get things done in Zoom. And if you start losing track of where things are, start looking for them in the taskbar down the bottom. I'm going to pop out the chat bar, hitting the chevron and hitting pop out. And again, this is quite a popular thing to do when people want to keep track of the chat and it needs more space. If you've got multiple screens, you can then go and drag this onto another screen, and you've got a way to monitor who's in there, what everyone's saying. Maybe someone else is watching the chat for you, whatever. You have control over that using that pop out function. And if that's not what you're after and you just want it merged, then you can hit the 3 dots and go back to merge to the meeting window. You also have control in the three dots area, bottom right-hand corner, over getting a copy of all the text that's going into the chat pod. You can get a copy of that straight away from here. You don't have to try and copy and paste, etc. The text. You can get a copy of the chat from here. You also have control over who can talk to who. By default, everyone can talk to everyone in chat. You can send direct messages to other participants in the chat, and so can all the participants. So I can find anyone in here. I could find Jed in the list in the chat area, and I could hit more. And there are a lot of options when you're a host next to each of the participant names. Before I do that, you'll see here that at the top of that list is chat. At that point, if I click in my chat window, next to 2, if I hit the drop down, it will give me a list of everyone in this meeting. And I can send a direct message just to Jed, and you'll see it says direct message just to Jed, and only he will get that. There is no way for you to get access to other direct messages. I usually get asked this at least once or twice. It's a private message, but you as the host have control over whether or not private messages can happen. All right, so whether the participants can talk to each other. Sorry, Jed?
No, I was going to say, one of the things there to keep in mind is that sometimes Zoom will then set the recipient of that private message as the default recipient to the next thing you type. So it's worth, before you type, just double checking if you're meaning to send a message to everyone, check that everyone is the audience, not the person who received that last DM. Sometimes it can just do that. So Lachlan, you might have an explanation for why that is, but it just from time to time does it.
I don't have an explanation really, apart from the fact that it's very dangerous.
Yeah.
Because what you'll get is if someone sends you a private message, and it could be completely harmless, it could be not so harmless, the response that goes into the chat pod, the next one will automatically use the same setting that's just come in. So if Jed sent me a private message saying, oh, have you seen what Lisa's doing over there? And I respond back, it's not going to everybody. It's going to go straight back to Jed. But yeah, and vice versa. So that direct messaging can really be somewhat problematic. It doesn't appear in recordings at all, Lisa. Won't appear in the chat transcripts, etc. All right, so you may need, if you can see direct message like this in red, you may need to click back on the drop down and choose everyone in the meeting. All right, something just to look out for. Now, the thing that I touched on a minute ago I'm just going to merge this now back to my meeting window, was the participant pod, and I'm going to pop this out so we can look at it in all its glory. The participant panel is also a way for you to control the classroom. It's a classroom management tool as the host. Now, as I said before, next to my name, I've got the word host. That means I've got all the power in the room. And at the moment, everyone else in here either has the word guest next to their name or nothing. Guest means that the person has come into the room without being logged in to Zoom, right? So they would have appeared in the waiting room and I've clicked admit to let them into the room. The others that don't have guest next to their name, it means that they've been logged into the CSU system, either into the staff portal, into Interact 2, for example, directly into the Zoom portal. Whatever the case may be, it has passed them straight through the waiting room and into the meeting. No waiting room. Now, if I move my mouse over the top of each person's name, I get two blue buttons as the host. One of them is ask to unmute if you want someone to do some talking and they're muted. The other one is the more button. And as the host, you get the most options here. One of them is you can ask them to turn their video on. You can pin them, which will keep them at the top of the list, for example, or where they are in the list. You could make them the host of the meeting. This is dangerous though, because as soon as you do that, you will lose your host rights. You won't be a co-host. You'll be just a guest like everyone else. So always be careful before you allocate someone to being a host directly. Most common is making people co-hosts. So if I wanted the person to be able to share or to take care of some other things, I would make them a co-host. So I'll find Jed in the list. Here's Jed, go to more, and I make him a co-host. Do I want to make him a co-host? Yes, I do. And now next to his name, he's a co-host. All right, so then at that point, he's able to do things like share his screen, for example, and also control to some extent the other participants in the room, some of their settings as well. Other options that we have in the room is, as the host, you can rename participants. People can't rename themselves. That setting was on when we first got Zoom and people were typing in, I suppose, inappropriate things as for their names, etc., within Zoom. But now that feature is off. Only the host can rename participants.
Just while you're showing that, Lachlan,
Yep.
it's just a question that's come through from Lisa with respect to the chat transcripts, or sorry, the transcripts of the recordings. And I guess I can just quickly surmise by saying that there's not one automated transcript technology at the moment, which is perfect. And Zoom is in that same bracket as YouTube transcripts or Panopto transcripts or whatever. I think what the best ones run at about 80 to 85%, Lachlan, in terms of accuracy. Is that probably being generous?
I think you're being very generous.
Yeah.
My experience, even though that the vendors will claim that, my experience is they're more like about 70 to 75% accurate, and you're almost always going to need to proof them if you want to make sure that they are. We'll have a look at the transcripts in a minute. All right, I'm not going to talk about closed captions today in this session, but one of the places that you access it is from here. The report option for those curious is actually sends a notification to the admin. It sort of blacklists someone so that their account is looked at by DIT, for example. I haven't really seen that utilized here, but the functionality for reporting abusers in Zoom, for example, is done through the chat pod as well. I would also point out that the icons that are next to people's names are also a quick indication of what they're doing or what they have access to. If you have a look just above those blue buttons where next to my name, you can see there's a green box with an up arrow. That means I'm sharing my screen. There is a picture of a cloud with a red dot in it, which means I am recording to the cloud. My microphone is going up and down, so I'm the one that's doing the talking. And my video, it isn't red and doesn't have a line through it, so my webcam is on. So in 4 icons, they've given a summary of what that person is doing. And if you're ever looking for whose microphone is on, making that noise in the background, etc., the quickest way to find it and to mute them is to look in your participant panel. Everyone in here is muted at the moment, for example, but I'm sure you've been in meetings where people have got all sorts of noise going on in the background. Quickest way to find it, look at the participant panel and look for the icons to see who's not muted and where the noise is coming from. All right, that's the participant panel in a nutshell. I'm going to merge it back to my meeting panel and we will continue on. The next part of the interface that I want to show you today for the basic session is to do with sharing your screen. Sharing is pretty important. Obviously, it's the most used function in Zoom apart from the chat tool. And when you share, you're going to be presented with a number of options. So we'll have a look just at the basics of doing that today. I'm sharing my screen with you at the moment so that you can see the interface. Even though I'm sharing at the moment, I can still click on share screen and you will be able to see exactly what's popping up for me. So let's do that. The only reason that you can see this, again, we go back to that setting I showed you earlier about sharing Zoom windows. You can see this share screen because I ticked that share Zoom windows option in your settings. So if you're wondering how other people see what you're seeing, that's where it is. All right, I've clicked on share screen. It's given me a 3-tab selection to choose from. The one we're going to focus on today is the basic tab, the first one, and there's plenty in here. 99% of the time, the one that you're going to be choosing is the top left-hand corner, which is going to be screen 1 or your main screen. If you're using multiple monitors, perhaps you might be choosing screen 2, but most of the people that end up sharing their screen will share their whole screen, and that way they then have some control over what they're dragging onto or off that screen. As long as you know that's what's being shared, you don't have to worry too much about what's open or what's not open. If you're looking at it on the screen, then the people in the Zoom room are looking at it on the screen. I will point out, apart from choosing a separate monitor, there are some other options in here like share a whiteboard, which is a fairly awkward and not particularly useful drawing tool that you might want to share in the room with students. Unless you're a pro at using annotation type tools in a room and have access to a stylus, the whiteboard tool is not particularly useful. Usually it means trying to draw with a mouse, for example, and it's worth having a look at to see if it's something that you might utilize, but I've only seen it really have very select applications for people that have the right tools to use a whiteboard. There's also an option to share from it's got here, iPhone or iPad, but really what this is talking about is people that are using a mobile device with the Zoom app on it, joining the same meeting that you're in and sharing things from the phone, whether it's the phone video or a screen from the phone into the same Zoom room. So that mobile option really is talking about sharing things from a mobile device into the same Zoom meeting. Then we start to get into options to do with particular browsers or tabs or programs that you have open already. So the first one is to do with Google Chrome because I have that open and it's asking, do I want to share the Zoom Basics Google Chrome slide tab, from Chrome. I've also got a downloads box open somewhere on my desktop and I could share that box if I wanted to. Over on my other monitor, there's a YouTube window open on a browser because I was playing music before. I could share that tab. So each of these middle row options is referring to particular program windows that are already open somewhere on the computer. I usually advise until you get very, very comfortable with doing this that you don't try and share those. Just stick to sharing your screen. Down the bottom as well, I've got a PDF open that has a cheat sheet for using Zoom. I could open that PDF directly in this room if I wanted to. But again, if your whole screen is already being shared, you don't need to share a window. You could just share the screen and drag on and off the thing that you want to use. Okay, and again, here's another box looking for files, Windows Explorer, I could share that. So go back to my original statement. Most of the time, you're just going to be sharing that first screen. For those of you that are wondering about sharing music or video or media, you do need to make sure that you tick these 2 buttons that are down the bottom. Share sound and optimize for video clip. So if you're sharing a website that plays back video or media, you'll need to tick this second box. Otherwise, it could potentially be lagged or delayed for some of the people in the room. Maybe not everybody. It comes back to being dependent on their bandwidth, etc. But the way that we make sure that it's consistent for everybody, your best bet is to tick this optimize for video clip button and to make sure that the sound is shared. Now, I know I've raced through a whole bunch of stuff there. We do look at sharing a lot more in the advanced session that we run and the learning and teaching session. But that's an introduction, if you will, to sharing within Zoom. The other thing that people want to know about with sharing is, as I did before, how do you share files to the people in the meeting so that they get the file? It is not done through this share screen button. We do it through the chat, and I'm going to show you how we do that. So I will stop sharing that box. I'm going to drag my Windows Explorer box over here that's got some files, etc. in it so that you can see what I'm doing. I wanted to share this PDF file with everyone in the meeting. So I can left click and drag that file down into my chat pod. You'll see that there's a little plus sign next to it now. Release, let it go, and now the file is shared with everybody in the meeting. So sharing files in Zoom is that easy. Just drag and drop straight into the chat pod.
Lachlan, it's just a question from Lisa, mate, just while as a bit of a pause, just around the difference between the new and the old LTI, and if that's covered here or next week.
I'm going to have a look at the LTI briefly in a second.
Yep.
And but we look at it in more detail in the advanced session. Yeah.
Cool. Just your screen sharing is quite pixelated for me too.
Yeah, it's because I'm moving my mouse quite fast as well. Yep. And what you find when you're sharing like that, because I've got a lot of things open as well, the quality of the video like that in the live video, not the recording, but in the live video, can be reduced when you're dragging things around quite quickly.
Yes, that's already improved there just now when you slow it down.
Yeah. So you'll find that it will change, and you'll get feedback from students when the quality of things is dropping down. It's usually to do with either how fast you're doing it or how many things you have open that you're trying to share at the same time. That other share option for optimize for video also uses a lot of bandwidth as well. So you might want to untick that. The other thing, I'm just going to share one more file with you. I have a cheat sheet here for using Zoom. Two, in fact. I'm going to drag both of those into the chat to share with you. There's one, which is the cheat sheet for people wanting to get used to using the Zoom Portal, which is the back end of Zoom. And the other one being the LTI, which is a tool in Interact 2 that Lisa was just talking about, and I will share that as well. So I dropped those into the chat. As long as the people were in the room already when I shared it, they will be able to scroll back through the chat and download those files. Okay, so I've added multiple files into the room for people to download. And that seems like a good opportunity, I think, to have a look at some of those tools, the portal and the LTI, in just a second. I want to point out one more area in the taskbar for us to look at in the interface, and that's to do with recording. There are two ways that we can adjust recording just within the live room itself. One of them is down the bottom in the taskbar. You can either pause, start, and stop recording down the bottom in the taskbar. By default at CSU, the ability to record Zoom meetings is on for guests, for hosts, for co-hosts, for everybody. However, that setting can be turned on or off in your own Zoom settings if you don't want students to be able to record without permission. Okay, but by default, it is on. You will also find over here in this security button area of the taskbar that only the host can see, that you will have the ability to control what people can do. And you'll find, for example, some of them are to do with things like annotations, using videos, those sorts of settings. You can actually change those permissions in that area as well. So two areas for recording. One of them is in the taskbar. The other one is up the top here where this cloud icon is that says recording. And I can pause the recording and start it again. This is usually an option for people that are playing back media. Like if you're sharing YouTube clips, for example, you can't record them. You're breaching copyright at that point if you're recording it, but you can pause the recording, play the YouTube clip, and then once you're finished, unpause and the recording will continue. As soon as you hit stop, however, the recording file will finish and the end result will be two separate recording files. So it's worth knowing that there are a few different ways to handle recordings. Unless you have a very good reason otherwise, always record to the cloud. That's my advice. You don't want to be recording files locally to your computer unless you've got a very, very good reason for doing that. By default, you want to record to the cloud, and that will give you other choices with what you do with it afterwards. Last thing in the interface that we're going to look at for this week, in the top left-hand corner, when you move your mouse up there, you will see a green shield with a tick as the host, and that is meeting information. And this is where if you quickly need to get a hold of the link to the Zoom meeting, you can do it up here. You can get the ID for the meeting if people need the meeting ID. You can also get the link directly to the meeting. So if you're in the meeting and someone emails you and says, oh, can you just give me the link to that meeting, or I can't find the link, you can grab it up here really quickly in the top left-hand corner. All right, let's stop looking at the interface for a second and I will see just how far behind we are. We looked at screen sharing. We looked at recording, the fact that I'm telling everyone basically record to the cloud unless you have a good reason for not doing so. The other piece of information you need to know is that recordings in Zoom at CSU by default will last 12 months. So they have a 365-day timer on them from the moment that you record them, and then they will auto delete. You will get an email a week before that happens saying that you've got recordings that are going to be deleted. And at that point, that's a prompt for you to download it locally if you need to, but there isn't any option in our Zoom account to keep your recordings in there indefinitely. The recordings will stay there for a year and then they will delete themselves. And this is so we don't break our storage caps. Jed?
Yeah, just again, that, like you said, just download them and utilize another tool such as Panopto as well. There's those options.
Yeah, absolutely. The most common ways of dealing with the video files that people want to keep indefinitely are either, as Jed said, to use our CSU video storage tool, which is Panopto, CSU Replay. So you would download the video file after you've recorded it and upload it into CSU Replay. Other people more familiar with YouTube, for example, also have either a school YouTube account or an individual YouTube account, and they upload the videos in there as a way of preserving them indefinitely. Okay, we will look at Zoom recordings now once we look at the portal, the CSU Zoom portal. So at the beginning, we talked about the Zoom desktop application, the front end. We're now going to look at what's called the back end, or the CSU Zoom portal, and you can find that by going to charlessturt.zoom.us. So I'm going to do that right now. charlessturt.zoom.us brings up this window. Again, 99% of the time, the thing that you're going to be doing in here is clicking sign in. And that will bring you into your settings in the back end of the CSU Zoom portal, and you are now signed in. So before, when I was talking about people coming into Zoom as guests, this is one way to avoid that happening, is to sign into the Zoom portal once when you log on to the computer, for example, and it will keep you signed in at that point. So I'm in the back end in the Zoom portal, and I have a view initially of the meetings that I have coming up that I am the host for. You can see those in a list, dates, times, etc. It also shows me the current meeting, and there's a little red camera icon to show me that that's being recorded. Over here on the right, there's a button that allows me to schedule meetings if I want to create one on the spot. Top right-hand corner, I can see my profile image, a tiny version of it as well. I can change that if I need to. But really what I'm looking for is this navigation menu over on the left-hand side. That's what we're going to look through now. Top item is a profile. We looked at a way to edit profile settings through the desktop application. You can also change them in here. The meetings button, as I said, provides a summary of the meetings that you have coming up or current. You can also look at meetings that you've held previously under the previous tab. There is an option in Zoom called Personal Room. Its acronym is PMI. And I would advise you really, again, unless you really know what you're doing, to avoid using your personal meeting room for anything other than a catch up with for non-work related stuff, because there are complications with recording to a personal meeting room and where they're made available. And if you're using the Zoom tool inside your subject sites, there are also ways that your recordings from your personal room can end up in front of students and other things as well. So I just advise not using the personal meeting room unless you really, really know what you're doing. And I'm not talking about templates today in Zoom, okay? So the upcoming and previous are the ones that you're probably going to be looking at in this menu. The webinar tool, just by way of explanation, we are using Zoom meetings, and the meeting tool that everyone accesses at CSU will allow you to have up to 300 students inside the Zoom meeting as your cap. Any more than that, you've got two options. One of them is to send an email to DIT requesting that you have an upgraded license because you have more than 300 students regularly in your meetings. So they can implement what's called a super user license. We only have a certain number of those at the university, I think maybe 25 or so, but that will let you have up to 1,000 people in your meetings if you have a super user license. The other option is to request a one-off webinar license. And the webinar tool, we have two types. A webinar, if you've been in any of our town hall meetings, for example, is a less interactive version of Zoom meetings that focuses more on presenting information and controlling the audience, really, what they can do. That might sound a little harsh, but in terms of the functionality available in the webinar tool, that's what it is. By default, they might use a Q&A tool, for example, to get your feedback, but it's mostly about presenting to an external audience. And sometimes people wanting to hold an external event in Zoom will use the webinar tool to do that, so they can give the link to people outside the uni and have a bit more control over what's happening in that session. The webinar license, the default one is for 500 users. The university has one mega webinar license, which has 10,000 users, and that costs a stack of money, and we probably won't have it for much longer. But we do have that. When we use the town halls, that's what we're utilizing. I'll take a breath for a second there. Jed, have we got anything to follow up on?
Yeah, just a good point that was raised via DM with me, just around the teaching resources. As a general rule of thumb, still the copyright still belongs to CSU unless there's other arrangements have been made. So just to link back to that point you made around the recording of YouTubes and so forth in the meeting, it was a point well made that you raised earlier. Yeah,
absolutely. I think usually the first concern that people have got first and foremost is that it's not being deleted altogether. And then of course there are secondary concerns to do with who owns the content and where it's going, etc. That's all perfectly valid. Okay, let's keep going through the menu. I really want to look at recordings. The recordings tab on the left-hand side will bring up a list of all recordings that you've made. It will give you a list of cloud recordings and local recordings. Now, the Zoom folder, at some point I'll get asked, or you may get asked, what happens if I record a Zoom file locally? Where does it go? Well, it sits inside, the Zoom recording folder sits inside your documents folder on your computer by default, if you're looking for it. So if you've ever made the mistake of recording locally and you're not sure where the video is gone, it's going to be inside your documents folder on the computer. There will be a subfolder called Zoom recordings, and you will be able to get hold of those local recordings from there. You cannot upload them afterwards back into Zoom. That's it. If it's locally recorded, it's on your computer and that's all. This is just a shortcut of getting to that folder if you need to. All right, the cloud recordings. That's what I want to look at. Here's the PD session that I ran on Monday. Date, when it happened, the name of the file. It's giving me the count over here on the right for how long until it deletes itself. And I also have a share button over here to have a greater level of control over how that file is shared from Zoom. At the moment, we're talking about sharing from Zoom. So I can hit that share button. Every individual recording file has these controls on it if you wanted to tighten up how it's shared. By default, they are shared publicly. So that means if they've got the link, they can watch the video. Authenticated Users button means they will have to have signed into CSU systems to be able to view the recording. I would advise that you don't turn that on because what that's going to mean is that unless the students have gone to the effort of signing into systems, they might not necessarily be able to view the recording properly. The way that we make our recordings and provision them to students in the subject sites, that's already been taken care of. They've had to log in. So I wouldn't be changing this setting and turning it on. It's only going to result in you getting emails from students saying, I can't view it, I can't watch it. So I'd probably leave that off. We don't need expiry dates really because the university account will delete in a year. Downloading by default, the users can download the video file as well as watch it. Transcript file, they can get hold of by default unless you turn these settings off. We don't use the recording on demand function. Some people turn on passwords for videos. So this comes down to the specific video that you've made. If you want to protect it so that only certain people can watch it, you can turn on a password option here as well. Okay, so there is a greater level of control over recordings in the back end under the Recordings tab by clicking on the Share button if you need it. Clicking on the actual video itself will bring up more options to do with the individual video. You can actually watch it by clicking on this thumbnail. So I'll click on that for a second. It will open in my browser tab. This is what your students will be seeing ultimately.
A few things that we want to cover off.
There's Michelle.
But
they get playback of the video, transcript, or the chat pod. At the moment, I've got a transcript visible on the left. I can switch also to see messages in the chat. And up here in the top right-hand corner, if I want to download the files associated with this recording, I can do that. What I want to show you is editing. Zoom has a very simplistic editing function for your recordings called topping and tailing. It just means that anyone who clicks on the link to watch the recording will only see the areas that you've changed, and they are accessed through using this scissors function that's down here in the bottom right-hand corner. You as the host can change this, no one else can. If I click the scissors, it will open a continuum underneath the recording of the start and the finish points. Left clicking and dragging those handlebars will determine where the video will start and stop. You can't change anything in the middle. You can't cut them or delete them permanently from the recording, etc. This will only affect someone who goes to play back the recording link itself. Okay, if you hit save, anyone who then goes to play that recording after that point will only get the recordings from there. All right, so that's what the handlebars are for. I'm not going to click save, but that's how you would trim the start and finish points of the video.
Lachlan, I'm going to be my co-pilot duty here, mate, and just say in the last 3 minutes, do you want to cover just those couple of basic hygiene points around getting organised and so forth?
I think I will very quickly. What I am going to look at though is the LTI very, very quickly, just to glance over it. All right. What you can actually do as the host as well in the recordings, the last thing I'm going to look at in here today is you don't have to download all of the files associated, the transcript, the audio file, the video. You can download individual ones just by hovering your mouse over the top of them over here on the right-hand side. Okay, but if you just wanted to get a link to share with people, you could click on this copy shareable link and provide that to the students. Now, let's have a look in a subject site very, very quickly. I've got it in an org site, but it amounts to the same thing for you. In your subject sites, you are going to see an item called Online Meeting Zoom. This is called the LTI, Learning Technology Integration, and I shared a cheat file, a cheat sheet on using the LTI before for you. When you click on the LTI, it will open up a connection or a bridge to your Zoom account in the back end from within the subject site, and it looks quite different. It's only going to give you access to a few simple functions, but most importantly, it will allow the students to see the meetings that you set up just for that subject. So as I said, we do look at the LTI in a lot more detail inside the advanced session, but what I'm going to do now very, very quickly is create a meeting that students could see with the example of the session coming up, so that I have a meeting for every week that the students will be able to click on and join. Any recordings that I make for that meeting will appear under this Cloud Recordings tab automatically. So you don't have to copy and paste recording links to your students manually. They will appear in here automatically as long as you are joining the meetings yourself from within this tool. All right, so I'm going to go through the process of creating a meeting in here. I'm going to click on Schedule a New Meeting. I'm going to give it a name. So for example, Weekly Online Tutorial. This is not an unheard of title for meetings. Don't worry about the description. It is not visible to anyone without great difficulty, so they're not going to be able to see that. I'm going to create a meeting using the dates here. So let's say if I click on the when, I want it to be every Tuesday. So I might start with next week, next Tuesday. Change the time. Maybe I want it at 7 o'clock at night, 7 p.m. Don't worry about the duration too much. By default, it's an hour, but it won't stop or start, etc. based on that. By default, we have Eastern Standard Time or Eastern Daylight Time, whatever it's called, New South Wales on EDT. Underneath, though, there is a button saying recurring. If you're creating meetings for all of your session, click recurring. First option, recurrence. I don't want it to recur every day. I'm going to change this to week. Every week, it's going to recur every week. And instead of bothering with this option about how many times I want it to recur, I'm going to choose the date that I want it to stop. So if, for example, we know that the session is going to finish in February, for example, and saying, okay, it'll finish on the 8th of Feb or something, I'm putting in the end date. You can also choose as an alternative the number of occurrences. So this is also quite popular. Instead of using that end date, I could choose here after, and the session might go for 14 weeks. So I could say I'm going to run it 14 times. And then the rest of the default options are pretty standard. The waiting room is on by default. Participant videos and microphone are off, so they have to turn them on to join in. Then underneath, we've got an option here about, do I want the students to be able to join before I get there? Maybe you want to turn that off. Muting of everyone is turned off. Oh, sorry, the muting is turned on when they join the meetings. They can unmute themselves to be heard. And the last option is to do with whether or not you want the meeting to be recorded automatically or not. So quite often academics, when they set up their meetings for the session, will turn on the recording automatically, but turn off allowing students to join before you get there. That way they're not being recorded before you show up. At that point, if I hit save, this is the thing I wanted to show you. We will be able to see a summary of the settings for the meeting. And I can then use this breadcrumb at the top here to take me back to the list of my meetings in the LTI. And this is what the students get: a list of all the weeks and dates and times for their meetings that they can then join at the appropriate time. This is the quickest and easiest way of setting up your Zoom meetings for the session if they're going to be held at the same time etc. You as the host as well have the ability to then delete individual ones. So we might say, for example, 28th of December, there's no class then, that's just after Christmas. I can delete that occurrence. And similarly, you might want to remove, another one, for example, if you need to, but you can remove those individually from the LTI. Look, I'm sorry we don't have more time to look over the LTI in this session, but we do go over it in some detail in the Zoom Advanced PD session, which might be next Tuesday, or it might be the week after. I can't quite recall. The schedule is a little bit jumbled at the moment, but I'll send out a what's new definitely around that happening. Okay, in the slide deck that we had right at the end that I've shared before, but you're certainly welcome to look at it yourself, there are some notes there just about getting organized with your Zoom sessions. The one I would point out most is that Zoom works the best for those that are organized in advance, particularly in terms of the content that you want to share. If you've got everything already open and ready to go, whether it's your PowerPoint slides or your document or the web pages that you want to look at, and just have them minimized, as soon as you start sharing your screen, you can just drag in to the shared screen the things that you want to share with your audience, and you'll have a relatively seamless experience as long as those things are already in place. Trying to open them and load them, etc., and find them after you've already shared your screen or whilst the students are waiting, etc., can usually result in a less comfortable Zoom experience. So look, I also appreciate that we've run through a lot of stuff today. There's always a heap to cover, and that's why I would really recommend that you come to the advanced session as well. And I will hang around for the next sort of 15 minutes or so if people have got specific questions that you want to ask me. But otherwise, I wish you all a happy week ahead, and we'll see you at the next one. Thanks, everyone.